So first off, thank you guys for coming. I looked at my calendar last night and saw 3P Ireland, and I thought, oh, that sounds fun. Who are they? And then eventually this morning, I tracked down the original email with Dave and realized, oh, we're talking about stuff. Um, so the reason I say thank you and mean it is because I love talking about this stuff. And it's much more rewarding when there are actually people there, though I will talk to my dogs about it. They seem mildly interested, but I think it's just because they're waiting to hear their names. Um, for me, the reason that I stopped teaching NLP, gosh, at this point now, almost 16 years ago, was because there was something that it wasn't anything wrong with NLP, but there was something that was being promised that I knew we couldn't deliver on. That we were going to somehow, like, if what we were sharing was it, then we should have been, as the kind of leaders in the field, the kind of happiest, most together, most effective people on the planet. And we weren't. Now, we were really well-meaning people, and we did help a lot of people, but I kind of thought, okay, so coping with brokenness is probably what's on offer. So I got really good at that. And when I came across the inside out understanding, the three principles, I saw something that had never occurred to me as a real possibility. And the first thing I saw was that some things are objectively true. Some things are just true. They're not true for me, but not for you. They're not true for people of my color, but not people of another color, people of my gender, but not people of another gender, people of my sexuality, but not another sexuality, my nationality, but not. They're just some things that are just true about human beings. And that when you start to see them, everything gets easier. It's almost like it's a fuzzy picture comes into focus. And it's like, oh, I get it. And then you just carry on, but now you carry on with clear vision. And and so the first thing that I heard that landed with me that had the stickiness that David's talking about is I heard Sid Banks in a recording say that every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health. They just don't know it. And I just knew it was true. It was one of those ones where I went, wow, how did I not notice that? How did I spend so many years in the mental health profession without noticing that everybody had it underneath the noise and the chaos of their own thinking? And and I changed. It changed me to see that because I saw it at a fundamental level. In the Inside Out Revolution, I quote Sid saying, "It only takes one spiritual fact to change your life forever." And a spiritual fact is just something that's true for everyone, that is universally true. And the first thing that I saw that was universally true is that babies don't need therapy. We're not born fucked up. By the way, I've learned how to use expletives, I think David called them, since. So I will be using some if that's inappropriate. And the old me would have been better. I'm sorry. It was actually Richard who taught me how to swear. It really bothered him that I wouldn't swear, but I just didn't. I mean, I never swore ever. And one day he said to me, "If you can't say it, you don't get to do it." And I said, "Fuck." And then ever since then, it's just flowed. But putting that to one side, um, what I've come to see is that there are two things, two spiritual facts, that when people see anything about them, everything changes. And the first is that we are made of life. We're made of aliveness. We're made of presence. We're made of spirit. We're made of God stuff. whether God is the right word for you or the wrong word for you. We are a part of something bigger than us, little us. We're part of a larger whole, and there is an implicate order to that larger whole. There's an intelligence behind that larger whole. And in this understanding, we tend to refer to that intelligence as mind, with a capital M, the divine mind, the hidden mind, the inner mind, the universal mind. That we are pure consciousness, pure awareness. Regardless of what we are aware of, we are that which is aware. Regardless of what we are conscious of, we are that which is conscious. And that we're made with a creative force inside us, a creative power that in this understanding we tend to talk about as thought with a capital T, divine thought, i.e. hidden thought, universal thought, the power to create. And I've come to think of these three things as gifts, the gifts that everybody gets when they come into being, when they come into form, when they come to life. And our life is the effect of how we've used those gifts so far. And you can learn to use those gifts in ways that create more harmony, that create more cool shit in the world, that create more good feelings inside us, that create stronger relationships, that foster happiness in ourselves and others, that foster creativity and effectiveness and productivity in ourselves and others. And so that second spiritual fact is seeing where our experience comes from. So when I talk about inside out in the inside out revolution, what inside, when Sid Banks talked about inside, he was talking about the formless, that which does not yet even exist, pure potential, the spiritual nature of life, the no thing from which everything comes, the fertile void, where you drop in the seed of a thought and it blooms into a thing. So everything comes from nothing. Our experience of life comes via thought from the pure potential of life. We live in the experience of thought, not the experience of our circumstances. But it looks, and everybody tells us that no, it's not your thinking, it's your experience. Or if thought comes into it at all, it's as a mitigator. Well, yeah, I mean, some things just suck, but you can think about them in ways that make them seem like they suck less. That's actually not. That was what we used to be saying back in my old NLP days, because that's what it looked like to me. But what I've come to see is that huge swaths of my reality disappear if I stop thinking about them. I sometimes talk about how to spot the difference between a real problem and a thought problem. And a real problem, if you got amnesia and forgot about it, a real problem would get worse, right? If you've got a health issue and you just stop thinking about it, it might get worse. If you've got a tax issue and you stop thinking about it, it might get worse. But if you've got a self-esteem issue and you stop thinking about it, it disappears. If you've got a self-worth issue and you weren't able to think about it for some reason, it would be gone. If you've got a confidence issue, but you forgot, you wouldn't have a confidence issue anymore. And so much of what it looks like we're up against in the world is just misunderstood, unrecognized thought. And so much of why life seems hard is because we're out of touch with who we are. And so the inside out revolution, really long way of answering the question, but the inside out revolution is literally a revolution, turning the world on its head, turning my understanding of life on its head, so that I see, oh, it's not out there coming in here, and then I do something within it here, and then I experience it here. It's coming through here, and then something happens up here, and then it gets projected out there, and then I see it, and then I react to it as if that's what I'm reacting to. But it's being created from a projector, from a light source called consciousness, and the film of thought goes in front of it and projects it onto the screen, also consciousness. And then I experience it through the senses. And so it looks like that's creating this. But there'd be nothing there if it weren't for this. So the mind works more like a projector than a camera. Thought being the film. Consciousness being both the light that illuminates it and the screen on which it's shown. Mind being the power and intelligence behind it. And if I don't like a movie, I don't have to stay and sit through it. Now it feels like you do, right? How many of you have never walked out on a movie? Okay, you guys are pretty cool, because actually, I've got to be honest, when I do that with groups, it's usually about almost 50% of people have never actually walked out on a movie. But I guess you maybe switched off a show that you don't like. But when that happens in our thinking, we think we're in denial. We think we're spiritually bypassing. We think, oh, no, I'm thinking it, so I have to keep thinking it, and I have to analyze it, and I have to study it, or I have to stop it. No, you can walk out of the movie theater at any point. Now, the movie might still play for a while, but if you're sitting in the lobby, it doesn't really bother you. Like, have you ever been in a movie theater or like where you're outside the doors and you can hear the movie playing through the doors? Like, it's like that. There's, oh, something's going on up there. Feels terrible, but I don't have to get involved. And there'll be another movie showing in a minute. And if I look in that direction, then I get a new experience of life. And that new experience of life is available to any of us at any time. It's one thought away. And that thought is whatever thought looks more real and important to think about than just being who we are, where we are, being an expression of this incredible aliveness, this intelligent aliveness. That's what we're all made of. That's what we are all a part of. I'm staring at the wrong camera. I'm staring at a camera that isn't on, I realize. So if my eye line's off, I apologize. But I'm so used to looking at that camera. But hello. So there you go, David. That was my answer. That's what it is. That's how you do it. That's what it is.
Can you hear me, or am I still muted?
No, I can hear you.
Michael, I love the metaphor. Sorry, I don't want to hijack this conversation. I want everybody to join in, but I love the metaphor. As you were talking there about the idea of the cinema, and I'm visualizing my local cinema where there's probably 10 or 12, individual doors. But you're right. If you just stop and listen to the different sounds and realize, you know what, I can choose to go to whichever one I want in that moment, if that makes sense. And that was coming across for me, that we don't have to be transfixed by just one experience, if that makes sense, in one cinema. We can literally choose, I'm going to try a different movie or different film, as we say over here. I'm going to try a different film, and that is our choice. I think that's what I was getting from.
Yeah, it's okay. This is another analogy for the same thing. Has anyone ever tried? This is probably, if you have kids, maybe you tried. Bertie Bott's every flavored jelly beans. They're based on the Harry Potter books. Okay, so basically there are these jelly beans, and um, the green ones are either lime or snot flavored, right? The brown ones are either chocolate or shit flavored. And so the fun of that is you pour all the jelly beans into a bowl, and it's a great kids game. And I remember when we first played. My kids were too old, but we played it with the God kids when they were little. And you pass it round, and everybody, each kid takes a jelly bean and goes, "I hope it's the good one." And sometimes they're like, "Hey," and sometimes like, but what's funny is the first time we played the game, I noticed the kids all sat there and chewed all the way through the jelly bean, whether it was the good one or the bad one. The grown-ups spit out the bad one. Well, it's like that. When we find ourselves stuck in some really thinking, we don't have to keep thinking it. But, like the kids, if we think we do, okay, I just got to suffer through this. And so there's so much more freedom around thought than most of us know we can exercise. And it's not about changing the thinking. It's just stop chewing on the thoughts that feel shitty, that taste awful. And if you find a thought that's delicious, keep chewing. Even more flavor will come from it, and it flavors your experience. There's a quote that is in the very front of the book from Sid. It's one of my favorite quotes. And he says, if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. Now, that doesn't mean you have to sit there and take every experience that your mind gives you, because, Sid said, I'm not supposed to be afraid of it. It's not, no, I cannot be afraid of being punched without going into situations and being punched. I cannot be afraid of falling without thinking I'm supposed to fall, without having a preference for standing up and walking. So, not being afraid of being afraid, not being afraid of being sad, not being afraid of being confused, not being afraid of being a bit caught up and lost and frustrated doesn't mean that I want those things. It just means I don't have to be afraid, because if they come and I know what they are, I know they'll pass. I know they're temporary. I know they're transient. I know they're made of gossamer. They're made of this energy of thought. It's like, I don't know if you've ever, my mom was a science teacher. And one of my favorite science experiments as a kid was you'd pour cornstarch in water. And if you put your hand in the water, it feels like you're grasping sand. But if you pull your hand out of the water, it's just water. So the cornstarch is kind of half solid, half liquid. Well, that's thought. When you get stuck into it, it feels really solid. But actually, there's nothing there. And when you see that, you don't have to be afraid of any experience thought might bring, but you also don't have to dwell on it. And you can cultivate the experiences that bring joy, that bring happiness, that inspire you to do cool shit and be a cool human. So based on what David's saying, I'd love to just answer questions. So if you want to raise a little digital hand, I'm pretty sure Zoom allows you to do that. And if it's okay, David, that I kind of take over in that sense, I'll just call on whoever raises their hand and we'll chat.
Can you hear me still? Again, I'm trying to do this on the phone, so I'm not sure if you can hear me
Yeah,
okay.
no, I hear you fine, David.
Before you take a hand, can I ask you one more thing? Because I want this
Yeah,
for our recording for the future.
sure.
I remember watching you doing a presentation to, I think it was a Three Principles conference. But anyway, basically you were saying I had to learn how to go silent, right? And it was so not you, if that makes sense, from an NLP point of view. From my original experience was all, the NLP trainings. It's all loud and noisy and whatever. But you talked about this, that you had to go quiet, you had to go silent. And half an hour ago, I had exactly the same experience when everything went belly up with this thing. I somehow had to say to myself, just stop, slow
Hmm.
down just for a second, just take a deep breath. How do you get to the silence?
Well, so let me talk a little bit, and in the book, because I think David said you guys had read the book or we're talking about the book. It's, there's a sort of a whole section on the value of an empty mind. But for me, the first part of it was realizing that it was worth it, like that it was a good idea. So I assumed that what would help me would be either better circumstances, so more money, more time, more responsiveness in the world, less of the stuff I didn't like. I did. That's, if I want a better life, I've got to have better circumstances. So let me go out and create them. And then I thought, well, no, if I want a better life, because thought, right? So I need better thinking or better ways of thinking. But at some point, I heard Sid talking, and he said, what everyone is looking for, whether they know it or not, is a silent mind. And it was another one of those, oh, that's true. There's a kind of a quiet, a calm in the midst of chaos or in the midst of peace, underneath the noise. When my second book on the principles, The Space Within, came out, I the woman who's cut my hair for 20 years, finds it cool that I write books. And she's not interested in this stuff particularly, but she likes that I write books. And so whenever I have a new book, she asks me for a copy, and I gave her a copy of The Space Within. And the next month, when I went back in for a haircut, she said, "Oh, I love the meditation you teach in that book." I was like, I didn't remember there being a meditation that I taught in that book, but tell me more. And she said, well, the one where you're reading the words on the page, but then you stop looking at the words and you start looking at the page. And you notice that the page is always there, even when the words change. Now, I had used that metaphor in the book as a metaphor for how you find silence, how you find quiet. It's always here underneath the noise. It's the space before thought. It's the space beyond thought. It's the quiet between the notes. And it's the screen behind the movie. It's the flip chart under the words. Like, there's so many metaphors for it, but it's always here. And if I understand that everything I'm looking for, the peace I'm looking for, the good feelings I'm looking for, the creativity I'm looking for, the fresh ideas I'm looking for, are all going to come in the silence. That's the bus stop. That's where the bus comes. That's where the insights come. That's where the good feelings come. Then just knowing that means I'm far more likely to hang out there. I'm far more likely to shift my attention from the words to the music, from the notes to the quiet, from the words on the page to the constant stillness of the white page. And sometimes just talking about it is enough. Like, it's okay if it's not, but how many of you are feeling a bit more quiet now than you were 2 minutes ago? Right? That's because we're paying attention to it. That's all it is. It's always there. But if I'm paying attention to the ever-changing thoughts and feelings and circumstances, I'm not going to notice. I'm not going to have the experience of that. The second I shift my attention onto the quiet, the feeling of quiet, it's always there. So that would be my response, David. It's just A, knowing it matters, and then B, knowing it's there. And says maybe we did lose him this time. I'd love to talk to you. Yeah, what you got? Oren O'Neill.
It's actually Oren and Clodagh here. I'll turn on the camera.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It's much nicer for me if I can see you. I appreciate it.
Hi.
Hey.
The gap is where the dog was up until a second ago. um, So that's all in there. Yeah, so I want to kind of, I'm relatively new to this. So I'm still trying to bend my mind around it. Parts of it I really love and kind of really sing in my head, and parts of it I'm still trying to grasp.
Mm.
I suppose I'm trying to understand how the intersection of experiences. So two people having an interaction, and my experience, my projector is working a certain way, and
Mhm.
their projector is working a certain way, and I see it a certain way, or I choose to see it a certain way, or I choose to project it a certain way, but their experience is different.
Mhm.
What is that?
Well, we tend in this conversation to call it separate realities.
Right.
Now, thought creates our personal reality.
Yeah.
And so we're all living in separate thought created personal realities. But there's a world beyond our thinking.
Okay.
The poet Rumi said, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. So we can always connect in that space. And then the differences in our realities become interesting. They don't become problematic. It's like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. And sometimes the way somebody thinks of it is really helpful. And sometimes the way they think of it's really not.
Yeah.
But if I stop thinking there's a right personal reality, there's a right movie. That's not how movies work. There is reality, but reality is formless and sectless and opinionless and judgmentless.
Right.
Reality, that kind of capital R reality, that's out beyond good, bad, right, wrong. Those are parts of our personal realities. And if we start to see that before we create our world of good, bad, right, wrong, we're the same, then just the fundamental basis of relationship is different. And instead of anyone who thinks different to me being wrong, dangerous, or stupid, they just think differently to me. And I stopped taking my own thinking quite so seriously. It's
Okay.
like, well, it either works for me or it doesn't. But I know at that level, it's not capital T true. But there is capital T truth beyond that. But in that world of capital T truth, we're all the same.
Okay. So I suppose, is it about trying to, so without judgment, trying to align your thinking with somebody, or am I just like each exists in their own sphere and there's interaction but not
Yeah.
change?
Let me, what you're up against isn't so much the question, but the nature of the question. So let me see if what I say makes sense. And you can tell me if it doesn't, then I'll try again. Okay. The transformative conversation that I talk about is a physics conversation, not an engineering conversation. It's about what things are and how they work, not about what to do with them. So if you bring an engineering question to a physics conversation, it's not going to make sense because you're not going to be hearing the physics. You're going to be trying to apply them before you've even really understood them. But the solution to any engineering problem is in the physics. The more you understand the physics, the better your engineering. So the more you see how the mind works, the more you experience, they use the word understanding a lot in this understanding, but it's not understanding, it's an experiential, felt understanding. You get a feel for it more than you're able to explain it. And when you get a feel for this deeper space, this world of deeper feeling, when you feel for the quiet, when you get a feel for the interconnectedness and aliveness that we are all of, then what happens is it just gets easier and easier to communicate. But there's not a technique. It's if I know to put the feeling before the words, it's just going to be different than if I think the words are what matters.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, it does. And I think I just need to let myself sit with it and feel it a bit better in myself.
Yeah.
I think Oren may have had a question as well, if you don't mind. Thank you.
No, of course. For me, it involves my moving my eyes slightly to the right.
Uh, I just have a very easy question for you. Where does thought come from?
Oh, the thought factory. It,
Yeah,
it, there's
Can I get a tour of the thought factory?
yeah, close your eyes. You'll be on one. Um, Let me try and give a perhaps more helpful answer, though I don't mind my answer. Because it kind of points to the fact that it's like they come from nothing. Thought is the missing link between the formless spiritual world of pure energy and the world of form that we think of as life. So it comes from nothing, but like the cornstarch, it can bridge the worlds. And so you can't see the source because the source is formless, but you can sense it. You can kind of feel it. I think of it sometimes as there's a wonderful line in a poem by T.S. Eliot. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall. And it just reminds me of like if I followed a river upstream, I might get to a point where it just seems to bubble out of the rocks, bubble out of a cave, and I can kind of hear that like even there's a waterfall beyond that, but I can't go any further upstream. So where does it come from? It comes from a place that I can't see, but I can sense. And I would call that place source. I would call that place God. I would call that place the divine, which just means hidden. I would call it formless. That which is before time, space, and matter. Which is why the thought factory is kind of a friendlier answer.
Can I ask one more question and then I will shut up because this this kind of I find interesting because I'm blind, but I lost my sight much later in life, and I have several friends. One in particular is very close to me that is blind from birth, and what I'm having a hard time understanding is where does his thought come from? Because it seems to me that his thoughts only come from the influence of others who can see. Because when you're talking about a projector, and I fully agree with that, the image is being projected onto a screen. If the image isn't there, there's no image there. So he's never seen an image.
Mm-hmm.
So are his thoughts being generated by or influenced by the feelings of others?
Well, all our thoughts can be influenced by what we've heard from others, what others have described to us. But there is an inner direct connection to source. Now, it may show up in his mind in a different form than it does in mine, than it does in yours. I don't know. I'm not in there. But original thought from the origin, is available to all. Fresh thought, new thought is available at all times to all of us. So absolutely, are there thoughts that we have that come from listening to other people and believing them? Absolutely there are. but we also all just we know things. And those things don't come from anywhere.
You don't think that thought in any way, I'm sorry for hogging that.
Well, I'll go with it. And if I don't think I can give an answer that's helpful to everyone, then I'll move forward. I'm answering because you're asking things that are relevant to anyone.
So the follow on for it is, if he's never experienced thought and he's born blind, and this is my question about where does thought come from? Is it possible that thought in an electronic term is downloaded to his brain when he's born? So there are thoughts already in his brain that he may not know, or I may not know, or we may not know, that just exist, that are downloaded from other collections of thought somewhere out there in the cosmos.
So I don't have a way of answering that question that is not philosophical.
Right.
So what I'll do, rather than try and get philosophical, is I'll share what I've seen and what has been helpful to me, and then I will move to our next question. The only thing I need to see about thought to be impacted is what I see about thought. Having a better philosophical understanding of how it might work for someone else doesn't move the needle for me. Now, what I've seen is that if I can distinguish, I can absolutely distinguish the difference between my opinions, my ideas, even if I don't know where I got them from, and a knowing in me, things that I just know. And I can't tell you, I just don't know where those come from, but I know their value and impact in my world is huge. So I'll leave you with that.
Yep.
And,
Thank you.
yeah, pleasure. Nice to meet you guys. And I'm really sorry, my Irish isn't great. I'm gonna go Eimir. Is that how I say your name?
Emer. Hiya.
Eimir. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. I was just wondering, if someone, what advice you would give someone struggling, with bad habits or addiction, like how to stop, how to get out of that negative cycle, whenever the urges kind of feel almost
Yeah.
like painful to say or to ignore them or whatever. What advice would you give to, get out of that destructive cycle?
Well, whenever, and this is not, I'm going to answer. Okay. So this might sound like I'm wiggling out of answering, but just let me give you the context. Whenever somebody asks me an engineering question, a how-to question, I always go back to look at the physics.
Mhm.
So what I've seen is that all behaviors are sane. They make perfect sense given the thought-created reality somebody is living inside. So if I think aliens are trying to steal my thoughts, then wearing a tinfoil helmet to prevent it is sane. Now, as it happens, I'm pretty sure aliens aren't trying to steal my thoughts. So the thought created reality is a bit nutty. But within that reality, what I'm doing is completely sane. If I live in a world that seems filled with pain and suffering, and I've learned that a certain amount of alcohol or a certain amount of drug or a certain type of sex or a certain whatever settles my mind and calms me and helps me cope with that reality, then that behavior is sane. It's just that that's not the only reality that I have to live in. So to try and change my behavior while I'm still living in that reality is fighting against my own common sense. That's why it's so hard to break a habit or change an addiction the way that we've learned to do it, one day at a time, white knuckling it, tricking ourselves, manipulating our minds. If it fundamentally looks to me like worry is keeping me safe, if it fundamentally looks to me like my anxiety is preventing disaster, if it fundamentally looks to me like my addiction, and I'm using air quotes, like the substance that I'm using or the habit that I'm in is what's making me, allowing me to have any kind of a life, then trying to stop myself is an act of violence against myself. And it's probably gonna fail.
But
Like,
how do you see things differently though if it's causing you so much pain? Do you know?
okay, so you know, if you're willing for the solution to addiction to take more than 5 minutes,
Mhm.
I'm gonna keep going. Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying we're gonna solve it right here, but if you start to see anything about how it works, you will start to get insights
Yeah.
about, because that's going to be different for everyone. So if I start to see that the problem isn't the behavior is actually the solution to the problem, then now instead of looking for how can I get myself to stop whatever, I'm now looking for, oh, is there another experience of life I could be having? Is there another way of understanding what's happening in my world than the story I've been telling and living inside of? And suddenly, looking in that direction, we start to get fresh thoughts about that. We start to see, like for me, the story I told right at the beginning, where, you know, I didn't tell the whole story. I do in the book, but you know, I had suffered from anxiety and depression for many, many years, suicidal ideation, the whole thing. I'd learned to manage it. I'd learned ways of coping with it, most of which were not harmful to me. But when I heard Sid say that every human being was sitting in the middle of mental health, they just didn't know it, my whole reality changed. I realized I wasn't depressed because I was broken. I wasn't anxious because I was broken. I didn't have those suicidal thoughts because I was broken. They were my attempts to deal with overwhelm. And the overwhelm was coming from having so much thinking. I was being buried under it, that my nervous system was on constant high alert because there was so much going on in my head. And suddenly it didn't look like I needed to have so much in my head. It just didn't look helpful anymore. It didn't look like I was going to think my way to less thinking. And so it just started to fall away. I didn't do anything. Have you ever had a food that you liked when you were a kid and you try it as an adult and it's like, ugh, how did I ever like that?
Yeah.
It's that.
Mm.
That's how you change it. You don't, but it changes when you see something new. So I've got a client who came to me 2 weeks ago and said that he, to his own surprise, had given up chocolate, which was his big addiction. And I said, oh, what did you do? He said, no, I just don't seem to be interested in eating chocolate anymore. He said, as best I can tell, I'm just not as kind of wound up as I used to be. So I don't feel the need to unwind. And that used to be what he did to kind of settle himself. So if you haven't, there's a video, I'm sure you can find it on my YouTube, called The Dragon Story.
Yeah.
And the dragon story is just another way of talking about this.
Yeah. Definitely. I'll check it out. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, let's talk to Greg.
Hi, Michael. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Quick question. So you mentioned the Rumi quote, the field where we can meet,
Yeah.
or maybe the space within refers to the same thing in your book. But if that's the case, Which of the three principles do you think describes that space or that field? And there's a bit of context. For me, I've kind of thought about it over the last 3 or 4 years, and mind would be the one that I categorize as the one closest to that space, as opposed to consciousness and thought. And I find that that's a deeper principle for me. Just wondered what you thought about it.
I mean, for me, and this is just for me, like I mean it like that. I don't mean no, the truth is. I mean, for me, the way I see it, the three principles are really one truth described in three different ways. And the one truth is that there is a formless energy underpinning all of life that comes into form. That's the one truth, formless to form. If I think about it or look at it in terms of the intelligence and aliveness that formless into form is, then I talk about it as mind. If I think of it in terms of the creative aspect of it, then I talk about it as thought. And if I think of it as the experience of it, the feeling of it, then I talk about it as consciousness. Mm-hmm. It's one thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that sense, it even Sid said there's really only one principle, but it's just there's nothing to talk about if you do it that way.
Yeah, so it's three metaphors to describe the same thing in a sense.
Yes, that is. I wish I'd said what you just said. That's perfect.
You can have that one. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet, Craig. Looks like we got time for one or two more if they're there. Yeah, Angela. Nope, not hearing you yet. Looks like you're still muted. There you are.
Sorry. It was just something you said there, and it's just like made my mind go. I work a lot with people trying to kind of understand trauma and how there's so much kind of talk, and even in the three principles community, there's so much talk about leaving an imprint, trauma leaving an imprint and stuff like that, and that trauma can't be in the body, and some say it is in the body, and there just seems to be this big kind of talk about it. And you said something there about so much noise in your head and your nervous system is alert to it. And something they say a lot with trauma is that you are hyper vigilant. It's almost like it's like my mind's spinning, going chicken and egg. Which one is kind of, from what you sort of see there, even in what you've said, what do you see with trauma? Do you think it can be not held in the body, but just that, like our cells hold memories, our nervous system is effectively not trained to react a certain way, but it is inclined, or that's what I see with myself. Like it's like as if your nervous system, it's like the startle reflex even. Like my kids get a great laugh out of how quickly I startle to the slightest thing. And to me, it's nearly like that comes before any thinking, if you like. So sorry if that sounds like a big long-winded twisted, but you've just something's just clicked there.
I'm going to speak to it, and I just want permission to be a little bit inaccurate along the way, so I don't have to be too careful with my words.
Yeah.
And I'll try and clean it up as I go. There's no such thing as trauma. Trauma is a description of an observable phenomenon in human beings. So it is observable, for example, that there are certain soldiers that when they hear loud noises, even if they're nowhere near the battlefield, they have full-on fear responses and panic responses as they would have done on the battlefield. Now, If we want to describe that as trauma, we can. If we want to describe that as a heightened startle effect, we can do that. If we want to describe it as a habit of thought, we can do that. Now, I'm not a big fan of descriptions that make something seem permanent and difficult to change, given that I'm making up the description. So I don't find the way most people talk about trauma to be a helpful description of an observable experience and phenomenon, because it implies that it's built in and deep-rooted and hard to change. Now, one of my best friends in the world is a former Special Forces soldier who had PTSD when we first spoke. There's a video of me working with him you can see on YouTube. He very kindly allowed us to share a video of my working with him. If you go to, you can probably find it on the YouTube channel, or if you go to Super Coach Cafe, you can find it on there. His name's Rob. And I've now known Rob, that session happened in 2018, 17 or 18. He's become one of my best friends. In all the time since then, I've seen him have one reaction that fit the trauma that he was on disability for. And it was, we were in London at the on the day of the coronation recently, last year or whenever it was, and some military planes flew by. We were in Holborn, and in the old Chancery Lane, and they flew quite low over our building, and I saw him freak, and I forget whether it was somebody in the group or I who said, "Oh, those are just the planes celebrating the coronation." And I watched him. Oh, okay. So it isn't that he can't still have that reaction, but because he sees it for what it is, it doesn't have him in the way it did when he thought it was permanent trauma, emotional scarring, the way trauma is talked about. So I simply find it a mostly unhelpful metaphor for something that is very real and can be incredibly painful until people understand it for what it is.
Yeah. Thanks. Just let that kind of settle. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, let's go, Anne, let's go for it. And if I can't say anything neat in 2.5 minutes, then I'll say hi. We lost her. Oh,
Oh, can you
there you
hear
are.
me?
Yes. I can.
Okay. Quickly, so in case I get chopped off again, when we talk about thought, where it comes from, can you explain to me how we dream then when we're asleep? Where is the thought? Where are the dreams coming from?
Yeah. I mean, to me, dreams are just the easiest place to see thought, that it's always happening. See, when we're awake, we think, oh, I'm not thinking, this is just happening. But when we're asleep, we know there's nothing happening with the body, and yet we're still having all these experiences as if they're happening. I mean, I had a dream the other night where a stranger knocked on the door of my bedroom, which was flooded, even though the rest of the house was dry. And they were dressed like the Invisible Man with the bandages around their face and the hat and the coat. And then there was a dog that attacked a kid that was eaten by a snake. Now, I woke up exhausted, but it was clear that I was exhausted by thought, not by anything that actually happened, because I know if there'd been a videotape, and I'm hoping there wasn't, it would have been of me lying in bed, maybe tossing and turning. So dreams for me are one of the easier places to see that we're living in an experience of thought. Whereas when we're awake, it's a little harder to see because it looks like stuff's actually happening. So I don't know if that was helpful, but it because you're frozen on my screen. But let me just wrap with a couple of quick thoughts, and then if David's still here, I can let him close us out. I really encourage you, if this speaks to you, this understanding speaks to you, the two things that I've seen that really just allow it to impact you the most quickly. One is look for the good feelings, the quiet feelings, the deeper feelings. They really will carry you far. Worst case, you have nice feelings, but actually those nice feelings open you up to fresh ideas, fresh insight, and fresh thought. And then whenever it occurs to you, look to your knowing. Look to that in you that knows beyond your thinking, beyond your opinions, because that's your direct connection to this deeper wisdom and this deeper insight. And it will teach you if you ask it to and if you let it. So, David, I don't know if you're here to send us away.
Can you still hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now. There you are.
Well, sure. Can I just say to you, for those of you who don't know, Michael originally was involved in acting in London. So, Michael, I'm going to ask you really quickly. You definitely know Fools and Horses, am I right?
I do.
You know, right? David Jason, you know the way he'd say, you're my favouriteest, bestest, most favouriteest in the whole world, right? So I'm saying to you, on behalf of Three Principles Ireland, you are our bestest, most favouriteest, hang on now, form of Michael Neill on the face of this earth right now, okay? And I can pay you no greater compliment other than to say the bundle of energy that is Michael Neill. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been a thrill for us, and please God we'll get to meet again.
Oh, a pleasure to meet you all. I hope to see you soon.